The morning sun glints off the Pacific as Admiral Chuichi Nagumo raises his binoculars, scanning the horizon from the bridge of the carrier Akagi. It's June 4th, 1942, and the veteran Japanese commander feels supremely confident. Behind him stretches the most powerful naval strike force in history. 4 fleet carriers packed with Japan's finest pilots, battleships bristling with 14-inch guns, cruisers and destroyers forming a steel wall across the ocean. These are the same ships that obliterated Pearl Harbor just 6 months ago. The same pilots who crushed the Royal Navy in the Indian Ocean, who sent the Prince of Wales and Repulse to the bottom off Malaysia. For decades, Japanese naval doctrine has dominated the Pacific. Their carrier tactics are textbook perfect, their formations unbreakable, their discipline absolute. But what Admiral Nagumo doesn't know, what none of his staff officers suspect, is that everything they believe about naval warfare is about to be shattered by an enemy they've consistently underestimated. American carrier tactics that exist nowhere in Japanese military manuals. Fighting methods so unconventional, so brutally effective, that they'll leave Japan's greatest admirals staring at their burning ships in complete disbelief. Today, we're diving deep into the moment when American naval innovation collided with Japanese tradition and changed the course of World War II forever. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Japan's most experienced admirals couldn't comprehend what was happening to their fleets, how American commanders threw out centuries of naval warfare principles and created something entirely new, something that would hunt Japanese carriers across the Pacific like wolves stalking deer. But first, let me paint you a picture of just how dominant Japanese naval power seemed in 1942. Picture this: the Imperial Japanese Navy hadn't lost a major engagement in over 40 years. Their carrier doctrine was copied by every navy in the world. When Japanese admirals planned operations, they expected victory as surely as the sun rises. Their confidence wasn't arrogance, it was mathematical certainty, based on decades of unbroken success. Admiral Nagumo himself had led the Pearl Harbor strike force. He'd watched American battleships burn and sink while losing only 29 aircraft. His pilots were veterans with thousands of hours of combat experience. His ships were the finest engineering Japan could produce. His tactics had been perfected through years of war games and actual combat across the Pacific. Standing beside him on Akagi's bridge, Commander Minoru Genda reviews the morning's intelligence reports. American forces are somewhere in these waters, but Japanese reconnaissance has failed to locate them precisely. No matter. When the Americans are found, they'll face the combined might of 4 carriers launching coordinated strikes with clockwork precision. This is how Japanese carriers fight: massed formations, overwhelming firepower, textbook execution. Every pilot knows his role. Every ship maintains perfect formation. When they strike, it's like a sword cutting through silk. Clean, efficient, devastating. The Americans learned this lesson at Pearl Harbor, at Wake Island, in the Philippines. Everywhere Japanese carriers appear, American ships burn and sink. But 800 miles away, something unprecedented is happening aboard the American carrier Enterprise. Admiral Raymond Spruance stands in the flag plot, studying radar contacts that shouldn't exist according to every naval warfare manual ever written. His task force isn't behaving like carriers are supposed to behave. They're not maintaining tight formations. They're not following doctrine. They're doing something that would horrify Japanese admirals if they could see it. They're improvising. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky peers through his dive bomber's canopy, leading a strike group that's operating on incomplete intelligence, outdated positions, and pure instinct. His pilots haven't trained for decades like their Japanese counterparts. Most barely have a year of combat experience. Their aircraft are newer but less proven. By every measure of traditional naval warfare, they should be hopelessly outmatched. But here's what the Japanese don't understand about American naval tactics in 1942. They're not fighting by anyone's rules, not even their own. American carrier doctrine, such as it exists, was written by men who'd never seen modern naval combat. The textbooks gathering dust at the Naval War College describe orderly engagements between evenly matched fleets, with careful positioning and methodical strikes. Gentlemanly warfare between professional navies following internationally recognized principles. The reality unfolding in the Pacific is nothing like those textbooks. American commanders are making it up as they go along, adapting to situations no military academy ever taught them to handle. They're using radar in ways that confuse Japanese observers. They're coordinating strikes across hundreds of miles of ocean using communication methods that seem chaotic to traditionally trained minds. Most shocking of all to Japanese sensibilities, American carriers are operating independently. Where Japanese doctrine demands tight formation flying and coordinated group attacks, American squadrons are scattered across the Pacific, hunting targets individually, striking when opportunity presents itself, rather than waiting for perfect tactical coordination. To Admiral Nagumo, this looks like amateur incompetence, undisciplined cowboys playing at naval warfare. But what he's actually witnessing is the birth of a completely new form of maritime combat, one that will prove devastatingly effective against traditional Japanese methods. Captain Mark Mitchell, commanding the carrier Hornet, embodies this new American approach. His ship is operating alone, hundreds of miles from the nearest friendly vessel. His pilots are launching strikes based on fragmentary intelligence and educated guesses. By Japanese standards, this is tactical suicide. By American standards, it's aggressive opportunism. The philosophical difference runs deeper than tactics. Japanese naval officers are trained to execute perfect plans flawlessly. Their entire military culture revolves around precision, discipline, and adherence to proven methods. When something unexpected happens, they adapt within established parameters. They improve existing techniques rather than abandoning them entirely. American naval officers, particularly the younger generation commanding in the Pacific, approach problems differently. When existing methods don't work, they discard them. When doctrine proves inadequate, they write new doctrine in real time. When traditional formations prove vulnerable, they create formations that exist nowhere in any manual. This isn't necessarily better or worse than the Japanese approach. It's simply fundamentally different. And in the chaotic environment of Pacific naval warfare, that difference is about to prove decisive. Back aboard Akagi, Admiral Nagumo receives reports that American carriers have been located. His staff begins planning the coordinated strike that will eliminate American naval power in the Pacific once and for all. Every detail is calculated. Every timing sequence is precise. The attack will unfold with the mechanical perfection that has made Japanese carrier aviation the terror of the Pacific. But as his staff officers plot courses and calculate fuel loads, none of them suspect that their enemy isn't playing by the same rules. That American carriers are already launching strikes based not on careful planning, but on desperate improvisation. That American pilots are flying missions that violate every principle of sound naval aviation, and that this apparent chaos is about to collide with Japanese precision in a battle that will leave the Imperial Navy's finest admirals staring at the impossible, watching their perfect formations torn apart by an enemy fighting with methods they cannot comprehend. The stage is set for a confrontation between two completely different philosophies of naval warfare. Traditional Japanese excellence versus American innovation. Proven methods versus desperate experimentation. And what happens next will determine not just who controls the Pacific, but how naval battles will be fought for the next century. Because sometimes the side that breaks all the rules is the side that writes history. The first hint that something is terribly wrong comes at 7:05 a.m. when Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga's reconnaissance aircraft radios back a contact report that makes no sense to anyone in the Japanese fleet. American carriers detected bearing northeast, distance 240 miles. But they're not where they should be, according to every intelligence estimate. They're not in formation. They're not behaving like carriers are supposed to behave. Commander Genda studies the plot board with growing confusion. The American ships are scattered across 50 miles of ocean, moving in patterns that violate every principle of carrier warfare. Where are their screening vessels? Why aren't they maintaining defensive formations? This looks less like a naval task force and more like individual ships wandering aimlessly across the Pacific. It has to be a mistake. American carriers don't operate this way. No Navy operates this way. But 800 miles northeast, Admiral Spruance is orchestrating something the Japanese military mind cannot fathom. His carriers aren't scattered by accident or incompetence. They're positioned for maximum flexibility, ready to strike from multiple directions simultaneously. It's organized chaos that looks like disorder to traditionally trained observers. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron grips his torpedo bomber's controls, leading Torpedo Squadron 8 toward what intelligence suggests is the main Japanese carrier force. His 15 aircraft are flying alone, unsupported by fighters or dive bombers. By Japanese standards, this is tactical insanity. Torpedo attacks require coordinated strikes with overwhelming force to succeed. But Waldron isn't following Japanese standards. He's not even following American standards, because American standards for this kind of warfare don't exist yet. He's improvising, adapting, making decisions based on intuition and incomplete information that would horrify staff officers trained in methodical planning. Behind him, his pilots maintain loose formations that allow for individual maneuvering. When they encounter enemy fighters, they won't fight as a rigid unit. They'll scatter, regroup, adapt to circumstances as they develop. It's controlled pandemonium that looks like amateur hour to observers accustomed to precise military choreography. Admiral Nagumo watches through his binoculars as the first American aircraft appear on the horizon. 15 torpedo bombers approaching without fighter escort, without coordinated support, without any apparent tactical plan beyond flying straight at his carriers and hoping for the best. His experienced eye immediately recognizes what he's seeing. Suicide. Pure, simple suicide. His staff officers exchange glances that mix professional contempt with genuine puzzlement. Are these Americans completely insane? Do they understand nothing about naval aviation? Sending 15 unescorted bombers against 4 carriers, protected by dozens of Zero fighters, is beyond tactical incompetence. It's military suicide dressed up as an attack. But as Waldron's torpedoes streak toward Akagi, something unprecedented happens in Japanese naval experience. The attack fails completely, just as doctrine predicts. All 15 American aircraft are shot down. Not one torpedo finds its mark. Japanese losses are 0. Victory is absolute and textbook perfect. Yet somehow, this perfect Japanese defensive success creates the conditions for their own destruction. Because while Nagumo's fighters are massacring Torpedo Squadron 8 at sea level, they're not watching the sky above. While his gun crews are tracking low-flying torpedo bombers, They're not scanning for dive bombers approaching from high altitude. The American attack that looked so amateurish, so poorly coordinated, has drawn every Japanese defensive asset down to wave-top level. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, circling at 14,000 feet with 33 dive bombers, watches the slaughter below and realizes what his orders have accidentally accomplished. The Japanese fleet is completely focused on the torpedo attack. Their fighters are down low. Their anti-aircraft guns are depressed for surface targets. The sky above the Japanese carriers is empty. McClusky doesn't hesitate. He doesn't radio for permission. He doesn't wait for coordination with other squadrons. He rolls his Dauntless into a 70-degree dive toward the carrier Kaga and commits his entire squadron to an attack that exists nowhere in American tactical doctrine. Because there is no American tactical doctrine for this situation, no manual explains how to coordinate accidental attacks by different squadrons arriving at different times from different directions. No textbook describes how to exploit the confusion created by seemingly failed torpedo runs. McClusky is making it up as he dives, creating new tactical methods in real time, while Japanese gunners frantically try to elevate their weapons to engage targets coming from an unexpected direction. Admiral Nagumo watches in absolute horror as American dive bombers materialize out of empty sky and begin systematically destroying his carriers. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. American naval aviation isn't sophisticated enough to coordinate complex multi-axis attacks. Their pilots lack the training. Their doctrine lacks the precision. Yet somehow, impossibly, his perfect formations are dissolving under attacks that seem to come from everywhere at once. Kaga erupts in flames as McClusky's bombs detonate among aircraft being fueled and armed on the hangar deck. Secondary explosions tear through the ship's hull as aviation fuel ignites in chain reactions that consume everything combustible. Within minutes, Japan's newest fleet carrier is transformed from an instrument of precision warfare into a floating funeral pyre. But the nightmare is just beginning, because while Nagumo's attention is fixed on Kaga's death agony, more American squadrons are arriving from directions that make no tactical sense. Dive bombers from Enterprise, torpedo planes from Yorktown, fighters from Hornet, all attacking independently without apparent coordination, creating a three-dimensional battle space that Japanese defensive doctrine never anticipated. Commander Genda stares at the tactical display in growing panic. American attacks are coming from 4 different compass bearings simultaneously. Their aircraft are operating at 6 different altitudes. Some squadrons are attacking in formation, while others have split into individual hunting pairs. This isn't naval aviation as the Japanese understand it. This is aerial chaos that somehow produces devastating results through methods that appear completely random to traditionally trained observers. The carrier Akagi shudders as American bombs penetrate her flight deck and explode among the aircraft spotted for the next strike. Planes that were supposed to eliminate American naval power in the Pacific become fuel for fires that consume Japan's flagship carrier from within. Admiral Nagumo, his uniform singed by blast fragments, watches his meticulously planned operation disintegrate under attacks that violate every principle of sound tactical doctrine. American pilots are fighting like individual warriors rather than disciplined units. Their coordination appears accidental. Their success seems impossible. Yet his carriers are burning. The flames climbing Akagi's superstructure cast dancing shadows across Admiral Nagumo's face as he struggles to comprehend what his 40 years of naval experience cannot explain. His carriers aren't just burning, they're being systematically dismantled by an enemy fighting with methods that exist nowhere in his understanding of warfare. Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McClusky pulls his dive bomber out of its attack run, banking hard to avoid the geysers of anti-aircraft fire erupting around his aircraft. Behind him, the carrier Kaga is a blazing wreck, her flight deck buckled and twisted like crumpled paper. But McClusky isn't celebrating. He's already scanning the horizon for his next target, his mind calculating angles and fuel loads with the cold precision of a factory foreman organizing an assembly line. This is what Japanese admirals cannot fathom about American carrier tactics. There's no glory in it, no honor, no adherence to the elegant principles that have governed naval warfare for centuries. American pilots approach combat like mechanics, fixing a broken machine. Identify the problem, apply the most efficient solution, move to the next problem. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the man who led the Pearl Harbor attack, clutches a pair of binoculars with hands that shake from more than just the concussions rocking his ship. Through the smoke and flame, he watches American aircraft methodically working over the Japanese fleet with an industrial efficiency that chills him to the bone. These aren't the panic-stricken Americans who fled Wake Island and Guam. These pilots attack with a systematic thoroughness that treats Japanese carriers not as proud symbols of naval power, but as targets to be eliminated with maximum efficiency and minimum waste of ammunition. Aboard the carrier Soryu, Captain Ryusaku Yanagimoto stands on his bridge watching the impossible unfold before his eyes. American dive bombers are attacking his ship from 3 different directions simultaneously, not because they planned coordinated strikes, but because individual squadron commanders are making independent decisions based on tactical opportunities that develop in real time. This flexibility horrifies traditionally trained Japanese officers. Where is the command structure? Where is the unified battle plan? How can naval aviation function without centralized control and predetermined attack sequences? The answer screams down from 14,000 feet in the form of Lieutenant Dick Best's dive bomber, its engine howling as it accelerates toward Soryu's flight deck. Best isn't following orders radioed from a flagship. He's not executing a predetermined attack plan developed by staff officers studying charts in air-conditioned plotting rooms. He's making tactical decisions based on what he sees through his windscreen. Soryu's fighters are out of position. Her anti-aircraft guns are masked by the ship's own superstructure. Her flight deck is crowded with aircraft being prepared for strikes that will never launch. Best's bombs penetrate Soryu's wooden flight deck and detonate in the hangar space below, triggering explosions that rip through the ship's hull like a string of firecrackers. Within minutes, Japan's 3rd Fleet carrier is transformed from a floating airfield into a blazing monument to the effectiveness of improvised American tactics. Admiral Yamaguchi, commanding Carrier Division 2 from the bridge of Hiryu, watches 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers burn simultaneously and experiences something no Japanese naval officer has felt since the Russo-Japanese War. Complete tactical bewilderment. His training, his experience, his entire understanding of naval warfare provides no framework for comprehending what he's witnessing. American carrier aviation appears chaotic, undisciplined, completely lacking in the coordination that makes effective naval strikes possible. Yet somehow, this apparent chaos is systematically destroying the most powerful naval strike force Japan has ever assembled. The mathematical impossibility of what's happening makes his head spin. 15 unescorted torpedo bombers should never have drawn down his fighter cover. Dive bombers arriving piecemeal from different directions should have been easily defeated by concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Individual American pilots making independent attack decisions should have resulted in scattered, ineffective strikes. Instead, his fleet is dying. Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, flying a damaged bomber back toward what he hopes is still a functioning carrier, radios a contact report that captures the essence of Japanese confusion. American tactics appear completely disorganized, but results suggest coordination beyond our comprehension. That single transmission summarizes the psychological impact of American carrier warfare on the Japanese naval mind. How do you fight an enemy whose methods appear amateurish but produce results that surpass professional excellence? Back aboard Enterprise, Admiral Spruance receives damage reports from his strike squadrons with the emotional detachment of a businessman reviewing quarterly production figures. Aircraft losses are acceptable. Target damage is extensive. Mission parameters are being met within acceptable tolerances. His staff officers plot the next series of strikes with the methodical efficiency of men organizing a factory shift. No dramatic speeches about honor or glory. No appeals to ancestral traditions or imperial destiny. Just cold calculations about fuel loads, bomb weights, and target priorities. This industrial approach to naval warfare represents something entirely alien to Japanese military thinking. Where Japanese commanders see individual battles as tests of national character and military spirit, American commanders see tactical problems requiring efficient solutions. Commander Genda, his uniform torn and blackened by smoke, stumbles across Akagi's listing flight deck, trying to organize damage control parties. Around him, sailors fight fires with a discipline that would be admirable if it weren't so tragically futile. The carrier is doomed, but Japanese naval tradition demands they fight to save her until the very end. Meanwhile, American pilots circling overhead discuss their next attacks with the casual professionalism of construction workers planning how to demolish a building. No emotion, no hatred, just technical discussions about attack angles and defensive fire patterns. The contrast in military philosophy couldn't be more stark. Japanese sailors dying heroically to save ships that cannot be saved. American aviators calculating the most efficient methods for sinking ships that are already doomed. Captain Yamaguchi, standing on Soryu's burning bridge, faces the decision that defines the difference between Japanese and American naval culture. Traditional honor demands he go down with his ship. Practical survival suggests he abandon the vessel and preserve experienced leadership for future battles. He chooses honor, lashing himself to the ship's compass and singing the Japanese national anthem as Soryu's hull settles deeper into the Pacific. His death accomplishes nothing tactically, but it satisfies cultural requirements that American naval officers would consider counterproductive waste of trained personnel. In the end, what Japanese admirals witnessed at Midway wasn't just military defeat. It was the collision between two fundamentally different philosophies of warfare: traditional excellence versus industrial efficiency, honor-bound precision versus ruthless adaptability. The rigid discipline that had dominated Asia for decades shattered against American improvisation that turned chaos into victory. The burning carriers scattered across the Pacific that day marked more than Japan's first major naval defeat. They represented the death of centuries-old naval warfare principles and the birth of something entirely new. Something that would hunt Japanese fleets across the Pacific until the rising sun flag disappeared from the seas forever.